You're listening to HackerNews.fm, the unofficial roundup of the hottest stories from Hacker News, December 12th, 2025. Today we're diving into everything from Rivian's surprise custom silicon and lidar roadmap to Disney teaming up with OpenAI on Sora, plus why Apple's slow and steady AI strategy might actually be winning.
If you enjoy these rapid-fire deep dives, don't forget to like, subscribe, drop a comment, and share HackerNews.fm with a friend.
Let's start with our first story. Horses. AI progress is steady. Human equivalence is sudden. All right, next up is horses. AI progress is steady. Human equivalence is sudden, which hit number 1 on December 8th and is still sitting at around 536 points and 527 comments.
It's this tiny lightning talk by Anthropic researcher Andy Jones, but it really got under people's skin. He walks through 3 graphs: horses versus engines, humans versus chess computers, and then him versus Claude.
The horse bit is brutal. You've got 200 years of engines getting 20% better per decade, horses totally ambivalent, and then between 1930 and 1950, 90% of U.S. horses just disappear. Progress in engines was steady. Equivalence to horses was sudden.
Then chess. Computer ELO ratings climb about 50 points a year, so in 2000, a grandmaster wins 90% of games against a computer, and by 2010, the same grandmaster loses 90%. ELO's just that skill rating system where 200 to 300 points is already a big gap.
And finally, his own job. He and the other old-timers used to answer around 4,000 onboarding questions a month. 6 months after Claude got good, 80% of those questions vanished, and Claude was answering 30,000. He says he was surpassed in half a year by a system 1,000 times cheaper per word.
A lot of commenters fixated on his closing. I very much hope we'll get the 2 decades that horses did, but I think we're getting a lot less. One called it a crushing juxtaposition that leaves you with a feeling of inevitability.
Others push back, though. One top comment insists LLMs aren't coming for your job any more than computer vision is, arguing most firms still have more work than people. But another dev says AI just pulled deadlines forward while work is sudden, salary remains steady.
My favorite response zoomed out and said we might need an Amish mindset. Pick our values first, then ruthlessly make tech serve them. Whether you buy the horse analogy or not, the thread is basically asking, are we steering this, or are we just along for the ride?
You know what's wild? Our human editor pointed out to me that we're an AI-generated podcast, talking about AI replacing people. At what point does something like us get good enough to replace the real thing?
Well, I guess we, both us and our listeners, are finding out, aren't we? Progress in synthetic voices has been steady. Equivalence to human podcasters might be
sudden? Next up is Rivian unveils custom silicon, R2 lidar roadmap, universal hands-free, and its next-gen autonomy platform, which hit position 6 with about 380 points and nearly 600 comments.
Yeah, this was Rivian's Autonomy and AI Day recap. So, new custom chip called RAP1, a next-gen autonomy computer, lidar coming to the R2, and this universal hands-free system. Plus an Autonomy Plus package that's basically their version of Tesla FSD, but cheaper.
Quick explainer. LiDAR is the spinning laser radar thing that builds a 3D map, and their large driving model is like a ChatGPT-style model, but trained on driving instead of text. Universal hands-free is just hands-off cruise on 3.5 million miles of roads, not full self-driving.
The article notes RAP1 is a 5-nanometer in-house chip that can push billions of pixels per second through their Gen 3 autonomy computer. That's Rivian saying, we're not just slapping NVIDIA or Mobileye boxes in anymore.
Hacker News immediately jumped to the business model. One commenter said, autonomy subscriptions are how things are going to go. Subscriptions will likely double as insurance at some point. people see the writing on the wall.
Another chimed in that they'd totally pay more for self-driving plus insurance bundled if it undercut what they already pay today. You can feel the insurance industry getting pulled into the stack.
Then someone throws cold water on it. With self-driving, push a buggy update and potentially all the same model cars could crash on the same day. That's a very software engineer way to think about risk.
And BSDER had that line about companies being able to make you a digital non-person with a click of a mouse. Another commenter went full dystopia. Imagine buying a $70K Google self-driving car and a glitch locks your Google account. So your car can no longer be unlocked.
There's also a culture clash thread. Folks streaming, I would pay so much for my own SUV to self-drive as well as Waymo, versus others saying, hey, maybe just fund decent transit instead of reinventing buses as robo-taxis.
Hardware timelines really spooked people too. Rivian says R2 launches in early 2026 on today's Gen 2 computer, with lidar and the Gen 3 box only later in 2026. Commenters are basically asking, are you Osborning your own product by telling me my early build R2 is obsolete before I even buy it?
So the vibe is, super cool that Rivian's doing serious silicon and lidar, but everyone's already gaming out the subscriptions, the liability, and the lock-in. The car is turning into an expensive SaaS app on wheels, and HN is very aware of both halves of that sentence. All right, our next story is the OpenAI Disney Sora deal. This thing hit around, position 14 on Hacker News? About 248 points and 482 comments earlier this week. Big corporate crossover energy on this one.
Yeah, so the article lays out a 3-year licensing agreement where Sora, that's OpenAI's text-to-video model, can generate short fan videos using more than 200 Disney, Marvel, Pixar, and Star Wars characters. And on top of that, Disney kicks in a $1 billion equity investment and gets warrants for more OpenAI stock later. We'll throw the link in the show notes.
And Hacker News immediately zoomed in on that tiny footnote. One of the top comments literally said the press release buried the lead on the $1 billion equity piece. Another joked, Disney said, our IP is $1 billion for a 3-year license or we sue. Altman said, we can pay with equity, but let's frame it as an investment.
Yeah, there's this whole mini-thread arguing whether this is circular financing or just Disney buying into OpenAI at pre-IPO prices while also licensing the IP. And the consistent vibe is that Sam Altman is, depending on your tolerance for hype, either master of the flywheel or the next Enron CEO.
The IP angle really set people off. One commenter said that after the whole Ghibli scandal, they never thought this kind of deal would happen at all, and called it a majestic business move. Majestic, ominous, pick your adjective.
And then you get whiplash takes about Disney's legal history. Like, they sued daycare centers over wall murals, but now I can prompt a video of Winnie the Pooh hitting the bomb? Another person pushes back and says Disney's just being realistic. As generative models get better, enforcement becomes impossible. So it's smarter to control one big platform than try to chase a million tiny infringers.
A few folks also point out that Sora is already heavily censored. So Disney's basically betting that those guardrails keep out the worst stuff, including the inevitable Rule 34-style content. But there's still a lot of anxiety about a flood of low-effort AI slop aimed at kids and just algorithm fodder on YouTube and Disney+.
My favorite thread was the philosophical one. Does this actually kill real artistry? One commenter says, this isn't good for anyone who prefers media that someone puts soul into. Another replies that dropping production costs doesn't magically produce more great stories. Just like NPM didn't suddenly mean we got more great software. It just meant more software.
So it kind of feels like a line in the sand. Either you get steamrolled by unauthorized AI, or you partner up and try to steer it. Whether this turns into a magical new canvas for fans, or just more background noise buried in the Disney Plus carousel.
Yeah, we're all going to find out the hard way.
Next up is Apple's slow AI pace becomes a strength as market grows weary of spending, which peaked at number 9 with 292 points and 353 comments.
Yeah, so the Bloomberg piece says Apple was the second worst Magnificent Seven stock in the first half, down about 18%. And then it just ripped, surged 35%, while AI darlings like Meta and Microsoft slipped.
And now Apple's sitting around a $4.1 trillion market cap, with one investor calling it a bit of an anti-AI holding, just because they dodged the AI arms race and all that giant data center capex.
Capex meaning we're building insanely expensive AI server farms instead of just, shipping chips and phones like usual. The article also warns Apple's at about 33 times forward earnings now, way above its long-term average.
Hacker News really grabbed onto that contrast. The top comment basically bets that within 2 years, it'll be obvious Apple has the best consumer AI story, because they're the only ones with a unified platform and easy local LLM access.
Right, LLM there just means a big text-predicting model. But local means it's running on your device, instead of in some cloud GPU bunker halfway across the world.
Another commenter reminded everyone that Alexa was a colossal failure, on track to lose $10 billion because most queries were unmonetizable, play music, and what's the weather stuff, which just burns compute with no payoff.
That ties into a great thread. People griping about brain-damaged robots running their smart homes, and then an actual Google engineer shows up like, I often don't even recommend our products.
There's a business model angle too. One comment says Apple isn't trying to sell your data or shove ads into every interaction. They sell devices, and AI just makes those devices nicer to own.
Folks really like that Apple Intelligence is opt-in, with an obvious off switch, versus Google quietly opting people into AI search or nagging them with full-screen Gemini pop-ups.
But then you get the skeptics. Apple, so hip they're clinging to 2008, and people pointing out Siri has been terrible for a decade, so maybe bad execution is just being rebranded as wise restraint.
And one commenter calls out the article's cherry-picked time window. Like, you can always make a stock chart tell the story you want if you just start your graph in June.
So HN's split. Cautious Apple looks smart in an AI hangover, but they still haven't shipped consumer AI that truly just works. If they fix Siri and nail the on-device tools, we'll see whether that 2-year best consumer AI story bet actually pays off. All right, next up is denial of service and source code exposure in React server components, which peaked at number 11 on HN 332 points and around 200 comments.
Yeah, this is the sequel to last week's React to Shell RCE. And now we've got 2 more CVEs, plus a follow-up because the first fix was incomplete. So everyone gets to patch again.
In plain English, there are basically 2 bugs here. One lets an attacker send a crafted HTTP request that makes your React server component server spin in an infinite loop. Classic denial of service. Your CPU just melts.
And the other can trick a useServer function into returning its own source code, including any hard-coded secrets sitting in that function.
Which is not where you want your secrets.
The blog is very explicit. These new vulnerabilities do not allow for remote code execution. But they do hit all the RSC packages, React Server DOM Webpack, Parcel, TurboPack, and even the first round of patches was still vulnerable. So you really need to jump to 19.0.3, 19.1.4, or 19.2.3.
Hacker News immediately latched onto the churn. One person joked, "You need to update again" could be the official next JS motto. And another said their umami stats box got pwned within 15 minutes of the previous CVE going public.
The top comment from Simon Wug nails the design worry. He said RSC makes it hard to derive which parts run on the client and which on the server. And to support that illusion, you get this deep, opaque serialization and RPC layer, which is now a really juicy attack surface.
Others were less diplomatic. One person said, "Any attempt that blurs the boundary between client and server is unsafe." And then there was the spicy analogy that using one JavaScript codebase for both is like cooking food in your toilet.
Which is memorable, if nothing else. But there was pushback, too. One commenter said they love RSC because it lets them skip REST and GraphQL endpoints and just write components.
In the comments, folks pointed out that plain React apps without RSC aren't affected here, and AceMark noted that Meta itself doesn't even use RSC yet.
I like the little meta discussion on severity. Someone wondered why DOS was scored higher than source code exposure, arguing they'd always rather have downtime than leaked secrets.
Yeah, and then Rick Hanlon from the React team chimed in with the log4shell comparison. Once you disclose a critical bug, researchers start hunting every adjacent code path, so the follow-up CVEs are painful, and, as the blog puts it, kind of a healthy response cycle.
Healthy for the ecosystem, brutal for your weekend.
Either way, if you're on the next JS app router or anything RSC powered, this is one of those weekends where you patch first and argue about architecture later. Next up is a show HN titled, I Made a Spreadsheet Where Formulas Also Update Backwards, which climbed to position 5 with 105 points and 59 comments.
Our human editor handpicked this one. Apparently, he's a huge spreadsheet nerd.
Well, he chose well. The show HN creator calls it BidaCalc, basically a spreadsheet where you can edit the outputs, and it numerically solves backwards for the inputs. The article calls it a bidirectional calculator and really leans into the experimental vibe, even joking, please don't use this to compute the load tolerance of a 1,000,000-ton bridge.
One top commenter nailed it. The interesting part isn't spreadsheet, but backwards. It's spreadsheet as a constraint system, where you're really solving equations, not just pushing values downstream.
Right. In plain English, that means each formula is a relationship, and when you change one cell, the solver hunts for numbers in other cells that still satisfy all those relationships.
The confusion shows up immediately in that A1 plus B1 example. Change the sum, and BidaCalc just splits it 50-50 between A1 and B1, even if they started 2080.
One commenter said they felt pranked that this wasn't explained sooner, and another wished they could just lock one input. People eventually discover you can prefix a number with #town to freeze it.
And the author replies with a nice little trick. If you want to preserve ratios, model a single scale variable and derive everything from that, so the solver only touches one knob.
There's a whole UX thread arguing constants should be the default and variables explicitly annotated. But Victor says he's leaning into the chaos because this is an experiment he made for fun, and in a serious product, the UX would need more work.
Folks also tie it to two-way data binding. One commenter quips, this is like pre-React frameworks, where everything could update everything and you eventually get spaghetti.
I liked the practical running example. Pace, distance, time. Sometimes you know any two and want the third. Exactly the kind of A spatial B equals a C constraint normal spreadsheets make oddly painful.
And someone points to Alexei Radul's propagation networks thesis, which is basically about using this kind of constraint propagation as a general computation model. It's cool seeing that idea pop up in a browser spreadsheet.
Plus, it's open source TypeScript, using TensorFlow.js for gradients in the solver, so it's hackable if you want to explore constraint-based spreadsheets more seriously.
I don't think it's ready to replace Excel in some bank's risk model, but as a playground for what if spreadsheets were little math solvers, it's a delightful proof of concept.
Yeah, it's one of those toys that quietly changes how you think about spreadsheets. Worth a spin if you've ever wished you could just edit the answer and let the sheet figure out the rest.